Hello and welcome to episode 2 of the Pebble Collector podcast. My name's James Gray. I am your host and Pebble Collector in Chief. This is my weekly digest of the writing I've been doing this week, how I think it's going, how I feel about it, what I've written, what I wish I'd written, what I haven't written, whether I've managed to do everything that I was hoping to do and where I think it's going. This is currently part of my master's programme, creative writing with literature studies at Lancaster Uni. I'm coming towards the end of that degree now. I'm just doing just writing my dissertation. And so these first few episodes are looking at what I'm writing for that dissertation. My dissertation is going to be made up of 3 pieces to form a collection, pretty much life writing, kind of fictive elements, maybe autofiction is a better word, a little bit of essay element in there. And this is the first episode of where we're going to look at a specific piece of work. Thank you to anyone who has listened to the first episode. It was a bit of a test. I hope the audio was okay and everything. It did occur to me listening back that it sort of sounded like I'd left the radio on with a little backing track that I'd put on it. I just wanted to have something to fill the silence, really. So I hope it wasn't too distracting or annoying. So this week we're going to be looking at one of the pieces I've been writing. It's the piece that I've been working on most recently. It's a hybrid piece, I suppose you could call it, in that it combines a purely fictional element, although that in itself is a response to a real event, with my own personal memories of a particular moment in time, and then onwards from there, and a chain of thought that I'm following. So it's called The Worth of Some as Seen by Others. That's the working title, subject to change. It focuses on the death of Princess Diana in 1997, the end of the summer in 1997, and which was this really pivotal moment in British history, modern British history, where, or at least it's cited, I should say, as a really pivotal moment in British history, because it was a transition from the quite traditional British image of the stiff upper lip and being very reserved to public mourning, wailing in the streets, crying, huge outpouring of emotion, which some argue is or was performative, and others point to the fact that it was a great release of emotion for a lot of people. So there's that element, but then also this idea that a lot of the press or a lot of the coverage, and even if it's spoken about now, it's, it was a nation in mourning. We felt this way. We were very upset by it. We were very saddened here. Well, of course, not everybody was. Not that they were glad, but it just didn't affect some people. So to talk as if the whole nation was united in this feeling is a little bit disingenuous. So there's an element of that, and then some of the snobbishness around the public display of grief, because it was very unseemly. It was kind of a little bit trashy, leaving teddy bears and stuff, and this millionaire-esque princess who had nothing to do with these people, and suddenly it's as if a relative has died. So it's a kind of complex time, and I thought it was just an interesting moment in time. And I was 8 years old at the time, so I was obviously a kid. I knew about Princess Diana, but you don't care when you're 8-year-old, I guess. But so I was reading up on it and watching, some documentaries and stuff, and I kind of expected to want to poke fun at the people who were doing the public grieving and the over-the-topness of it. There's a really funny bit that Stuart Lee does in his stand-up, or used to do in his stand-up, about the death of Princess Diana, and how he does this whole little acting out of a couple talking about the death of Princess Diana, and how he'd been watching the footage, and there was an inflatable ET, and what the conversation must have been like in their home to be like, we have to do something, we've got to leave, we've got to go get an inflatable ET. Anyway, that was very funny. I've just ruined it. And I watched this documentary with Christopher Hitchens, or the other Hitchens. Anyway, one of the Hitchens, who I'm not normally a big fan of, but watched the documentary, and again I expected to kind of agree with him. He was taking this idea that it was just a really bizarre moment in time where people had this flood of supposed emotion, but actually it was very performative, and how it wasn't true that it was the whole nation. But I just found the whole thing very snobby and very snooty and quite condescending and a little bit just really mean and not very nice. And it had a definite agenda to it that I didn't really agree with. So I came away with it thinking, actually, well, regardless of how I feel about it, or regardless of how it seems, if that's how somebody wanted to react, then that's valid. But there's a quote which I've used as a sort of subheading to the piece, which may or may not stay in the final version, but it's from that documentary. And his commentary on it. And her life was cruelly and abruptly translated from the banal to the sublime, which I do like. I think that's a good summation, because I suppose, so the banal element of it's a death and everybody dies, I think is really important. And this idea of the banality of every life in the end and every death. We all die. The circumstances of the death can elevate that death, but in the grand scheme of things, they're all the same. The personal tragedy and the personal details on an individual level mean that a death can't be banal. But as an event in the world, they all are. It also made me think about the nature of history and our place within it, and how we all, that phrase of we all know where we were when 9/11 happened or JFK was shot or whatever, and you all remember where you were when you heard Diana died. And there's this kind of talk about like the currency of witness. Well, it's more significant for me because, 9/11's more significant because we were meant to fly that day, but we didn't. We weren't flying to New York. It's just, but everyone has to have a story that somehow makes them closer to the epicenter than the person they're talking to. This is me being a bit unfair. Not everybody is this way, but I do pick up on it sometimes. We have to tie a little bit of ourselves to what's happened, to kind of hang on the coattails of the significance of history. Princess Diana is a remote figure, and her death is remote from our lives. But by remembering where we were and attaching significance to it, we somehow save ourselves from complete anonymity or complete insignificance. I find that an interesting concept. I guess that's what I'm doing in this story. I'm talking about Princess Diana, but I'm saying why it's significant to me. It's just an extension of that. And then the sublime, I think, is a really interesting thing to explore, which is what I've tried to do in this piece. Do so through my own memories of that moment. My mother was very similar age to Diana, 2 years older than Diana, Had got married at a similar time. Children were kind of a similar age, so I think Diana's kids are a little bit older. I've got red hair or reddish hair, and so people used to say I looked like Prince Harry a little bit. So there was just this kind of like few little threads of connection. But then the more I was thinking, remembering this, and the more that I was thinking about how close that connection was, or the sense of feeling there was for my mum and Princess Diana, how she came to symbolise a certain tragic English womanhood, or a certain kind of, that English rose they always talk about and all this kind of stuff. And I think probably that was the image that a lot of people had of her. So I just felt like there was actually more of a depth of personal connection for my mum than I realised. And then I just sort of explored that further into memories of my mum had a friend who also looked like Diana and always had the same kind of similar haircut as her. And it was interesting to let those chain of memories start to open up. I lost my mum 3 years ago, just over. And so I wanted to kind of pick at a little bit of this, the loss of a mother that the children of Diana experienced, and then obviously I've experienced, although albeit much later in life, which I find as I think it's an interesting thread to follow, although obviously I think that otherwise I wouldn't be writing about it. And as I was thinking about this and how I tie it together and why I wanted to talk about it, watching a lot of the footage of the funeral and the masses of people, thousands of people lining the mall, and the flowers and the teddies and everything. And I was just thinking about what that night following the funeral would have been like, where everybody's gone home. There's been such noise and emotion concentrated into that one space that's now gone. And I just had this idea of almost like a ringing bell or an echo or a ringing in the ears after being in a loud place, and how the space sort of maybe resonated with that, and how strange that would seem. And as I was thinking about that and watching this footage, I just had this idea of a giant inflatable skeleton. Originally it was going to be 200 foot tall. I think I've reduced it to 100 foot because 200, the scale of 200 was hard to work with. A 200 foot tall skeleton that then stalks down the mall the night after the funeral and just is kind of semi-floating, what has like an element of volition or autonomy, can kind of move. It steps down the mall really slowly. It's got those kind of like loosely hinged joints of a helium balloon figure, a kind of marionette puppet type movement, and it moves down the mall, and it's, because it's a balloon, it's kind of subject to the breeze and the wind, and looks around at all these flowers, and it's got this halo or a crown of fake diamonds, and that sort of, the frill that you get around the edge of helium balloons. It's kind of metallic, shiny frill, and eventually the breeze catches it, and it kind of creates this strange shape. Not quite like the carpet outside a carpet showroom where you have those inflatable guys that like wave around, but yeah, the wind takes it and picks it up and contorts it and picks it up over the buildings of central London into the sky, and it kind of bounces off skyscrapers and stuff into the night sky and disappears. And it keeps happening every week, and eventually people, the funeral gets, all the stuff gets tidied away. It's interesting actually, they mulched all the flowers and used them as mulch on the royal gardens, and all the teddies were taken and given to children in hospitals, and any of the flowers that were still good they gave to people in care homes. Just an interesting little fact. So you've got this skeleton that keeps coming back every week, and eventually people get this idea that it becomes almost like a site of pilgrimage. People leave offerings where it's touched the ground, or they try and touch the skeleton. And I was thinking about saints and relics, like a shriveled finger of a saint that's kept in a box in an altar, and that people come and try and touch it so that might bring them good luck or fertility or these kind of things. Or people kiss graves or rub the toe of a statue. You get these shiny toes. And I was thinking about that, and how that the skeleton could almost become that quite a Catholic notion of a pilgrimage or a relic, and people start visiting the site and trying to touch the skeleton, or else leave little votive offerings wherever the skeleton's touched the ground. And I was trying to think, why would people do that? I mean, they left flowers and stuff for Diana, but this is beyond that. There's got to be something that they're trying to cure, almost like going to Lourdes and you have sickness or whatever. What are they trying to cure? And so I had this idea of incurable grief, of inconsolable grief. And these people they're widowed or bereaved in some way, and they can't get over it, and so they start to believe that by doing this act they can alleviate the grief. So I then started thinking about my place within it. So I've got my memories of it, and then I've led those thoughts through to the idea of my mum's seeming similarity to the princess and her friends, seeming similarity. There's some little biographical memories there of how this friend looked quite similar, and there was a lot of similarities between her and my mum and the family that she had. She actually eventually started to live in my mum's house once mum had passed away, and almost like became a simulation of my mum, which tried to mirror what was happening with the skeleton. I've been reading a lot about simulation and simulacra, so this idea of the things we're presented with no longer being the reality, but being a reflected or a copied version of it. I think the simulation was an important thing to think about when thinking about the public, or the apparent public reaction to Diana's death, and how perhaps the way that period is represented to us as being a nation in mourning and we all felt the same way is perhaps a simulation of what the reality was. I wanted to kind of focus on the unreliability of that, or the malleability of that, and then bringing in my own the loss of my mother. I don't really dwell on it that much. I speak about it in other pieces, but it still had a relevance. I had these two strands, but they're still pretty disparate, and I wanted to bring them together. So eventually I placed myself into the story, and that brings us towards a conclusion. But at the moment, I do feel like the ending, the mechanics of this haunting of the skeleton, they're ambiguous, and that's fine. But basically, I go to London It seems like I go to London to do the same thing, to try and solve this inconsolable grief. And the skeleton doesn't appear for the first time, and that leaves me bereft or whatever. But why does it not appear? I don't really have a mechanic for that. And there's this thing, isn't there, that coincidence can get you into a problem, but it cannot get you out of a problem in storytelling. You can't just have a coincidence. So I think I need a mechanic, or at least I've tried to put some nod towards the mechanic in there, or towards a change, but I think it just needs a little bit more. In the development of the story, the initial feedback was that, really good image, but it needs to go somewhere, which is pretty much feedback for everything that I write, or certainly the fictional stuff. Get quite a decent image, but it needs to go somewhere, it needs to progress. And so that is why originally I just had the skeleton turning up and that was enough. But it needed to do something. It needed to either, float across the country and do something, or else it needed to start meddling in people's lives or something, which is where I got the idea of it became the site of pilgrimage, because it becomes a change in how it's being treated, and then eventually develops into me interacting with it. So, yeah, I like the imagery. I've also introduced a motif of foxes, thinking about the city streets and stuff, but also this idea of particularly like a female, a mother fox, a being that is outside of the impact or influence of this event, that just carries on regardless, and is perhaps the truth of it, is perhaps the real world, the natural material world, rather than the simulation world. And foxes are kind of a cool animal to have in a story. They stalk around, and they're there at night, and they move in the shadows, and they kind of have this potential for violence, although they're normally scavenging. I don't know. It's quite long. It's 4,000 words, so I don't know whether to read the whole thing or just read maybe the start at the beginning. I'm not sure. Tell you what, I'll read the full thing, see how long that takes, and then if that's too long, I'll read the beginning. I'll read a section of the beginning, a section from the end, because we're on 20 minutes already, so let's not overdo it. So I'll go from the start. The worth of some as seen by others. Cruelly and abruptly translated from the banal to the sublime. The first week of September is still sticky with summer. As the nights begin to stretch, a 100-foot inflatable skeleton stalks London's Mall, slow and careful steps along pink tarmac between plane trees and flagpoles, their banners draped untidily. Its joints are loose, a stringless marionette. The 10-foot wide rictus beams like a searchlight. The street is littered with petals and stalks, whole flowers. Some appear perfect, newly picked, others reduced to browning mush by tyres and feet, hooves and rubber. The black sockets scan the teddy bears and devotional notes. The skull is topped with zirconia, refracting the phantom light of an infant moon. The city extends in all directions, endless and silent, the empty streets ringing. The skeleton lowers itself to a loose and steady squat. Tight and shining skinned fingers reach, pinching a red rose from the railing. A single bloom wrapped in a cellophane cone. The skeleton unfolds to stand once again. As the skeleton turns to walk from the palace, a breeze, announced by the muttering of flags, pushes it to an unnatural angle. The arms lift above the gleaming skull, as though in a gentle, meaningful dance. The rose, loosed from the cellophane, drops to the road, rolling to a stop behind the stooping figure. The wind lifts car-long feet from the ground. The body rises above the stirring leaves. Slowly it inverts, outsized skull dipping below the ribs. A fox barks, shrill and full of static. The skeleton continues to lift with the gathering air, bumping from walls to rooftops, knocking blinded satellite dishes from their masts. Few see the skeleton that night, most that do choose to ignore it. None mention it the next day. The week before I was awake early, sitting too close to the television and eating a second bowl of cereal. I was 8 years old and it was Sunday. My mum was in the kitchen, smoking and drinking the thick, dark coffee from a cafetiere that me and my sister called fagash coffee. I think I would remember if it had been anything so dramatic as the news interrupting whatever programme I was watching. That would be the better story, the currency of witness. If I had known how much the news would have impacted my mum, I probably would have made more out of being the one to tell her the death of a former princess. It is the same the following week. The skeleton tiptoes the kilometre stretch between Buckingham Palace and Admiralty Arch before being lifted into the waiting sky, blown clear of the city. The streets are still drifted with loosed blossom, the air thickened by the sweet rot. The stuffed toys have begun to sag in their restraints, slipping through as if hung, ready to be drawn and quartered. Some of the hundreds of thousands of devotional offerings have begun to be cleared. Personal sacraments turn to litter. Fly-tipped grief petals choke the gutters. It will be another week before the road is clear. A siren far to the east sounds briefly and leaves no echo. The city has begun to stir. The nights no longer so quick to hush themselves into artificial sleep. The skeleton rises, a jumbling nest of limbs. The skull lolls from the body, a grotesque parody of a lover's arch. The strengthening moon picks out the silvery frill that surrounds the inflated body. More visible this time, but still, sightings go undiscussed in the morning light. I would like to ask my mum if the shock she felt at hearing the news of that death in a French underpass was really shock at the death of a princess, or the effect of seeing her own life smashed against concrete. Ask if that by telling her a princess had died, whether she was or was not a princess by then being irrelevant, I had forced a confession, that she had viewed their lives in parallel somehow. There was only 2 years between them, and aside from a slightly larger nose than either of them would have wanted, that is where the similarities seem to end. But I am not sure that my mum, or any of those that mourned that week, needed further parallels to feel an affinity with a figure so far removed from their lives. There are pictures of my mum from when she was 21 or so, newly married and smiling in a way I'm not sure I ever saw her smile when I knew her. Her light auburn hair showing that same sweeping wave as a 20-year-old princess on her wedding day. They share a sidelong smile, smirking at their own good fortune, or perhaps at the pretense of it all. The skeleton continues its weekly march. The nights have grown long, thickened as the year plays itself out. The city has roused itself in the weeks since it began to appear, shaking off the torpor that had lain like a blanket over the entire country, the capital its last stronghold, as if proximity to an epicentre had some sticking effect. The night had been populated once again by light and noise, voices and engines. For those that witnessed the skeleton's flight, it is felt to be the last vestige of a dream trace, seen upon waking. The few that try to discuss it are quickly hushed, as if trespassing. The mall remains empty by night, an open-air crypt around which the city's vigil has dispersed. Fewer flowers are left now. As with all hauntings, the pattern is the same, tracing the same route, ending in a ridden updraft. Only the exact arrangement of arms, legs, skull and ribcage varies. Some weeks it is seen splayed and cartwheeling over the skyline. Others it is hunched and fetal. Always the glinting skull, star-like refraction of city lights in its false corona. I cannot remember if we watched the funeral. It is unlikely I would sit through however many hours of coverage it must have garnered, but when I think of it, I find it easy to imagine my mum looking at the television set mounted high and small in the kitchen. It was a Saturday. Likely she was ironing shirts for the week ahead. The television, the funeral, a background distraction. I would like to ask her how it felt to watch 2 young boys following the cortege of their mother's corpse. How it felt to see a boy only a few years older than her own son, walking in silence as thousands wailed for his mother, his grief, on either side. Those screaming crowds seeming to take ownership of the 2 boys' loss. The likeness already commented upon and often in the years since, between the dead woman's youngest son and her own. Yet to have witnessed the dislocation between the 2, so profound as to be unfathomable to any living parent. How strange it must have all seemed, this spectacle of mourning from all but those closest to the carriage. I wonder if my mum cried at all. I cannot imagine she would for the loss of the life, but perhaps for the children, for her own fairy tale, or for something else, something she thought I could never know or understand. But perhaps with my own child asleep beside me, and my own mum gone, I can know something of that, something of the tears shed without warning. The first offerings appear as winter begins to roost among the city's eaves. Small votive gestures marking out where the skeleton's foot or hand had brushed the ground. A handful of cheap flowers, sweets wrapped in shining colour. Ribbons and buttons, small enough to be missed, swept up by the next day's feet. These early devotions are limited to the route along the mall, to the tarmac and ground. But as the year peters out, any point of contact is sought. 10 feet up a lamppost, the gables of nearby buildings. The flat and cluttered roofs of tower blocks, increasingly remote, elevated and precarious. Locks of hair, wallet-worn photographs, faded to eyes and hair and smiles. Scraps of paper folded in on themselves, tight layered as rocks. The exact route shifts with the breeze, the precise circuit of devotion wandering like a river over a floodplain. Silent pilgrims are spotted on fire escapes and overpasses, reaching, trying to reach, to touch these sites of contact. Mothers, husbands, sons, any whose losses are so profound or so lingering that their grief has become chronic. Entire families lost in house fires and bus crashes, leaving one or two to carry a ton weight of sorrow. The inconsolable seeking a diminishment, a lessening of their grief. Families riddled with cancer, leaving children stripped of childhood. Those for whom grief is an untidy and ragged wound that refuses to heal, seeping and sore, easily torn. For those who seek an end, a beating back of the flames of their agony through a touching, an offering, a prostration. The mechanics, the precise formula is never established. The efforts ad hoc, improvised, unique to each. Some begin to wait, lining them all, not the sleeping bags and deck chairs of a ticket queue or film premiere, each standing separate, alone and silent, heads bowed or else looking to the sky, towards the palace. Once the skeleton appears, its feet and shins glinting in the lamplight, its upper portions eclipsed by the night or else spotlit by stray city beams, tumbling down the mall, twisting to the wind, the awaiting mourners begin to animate, each one in turn, running, sprinting towards the heel or rising toes, jumping as the phantom limb lifts out of the lamplight, running ahead to anticipate the next footfall, hopeful, desperate for a glancing touch, a moment of exchange with the shining, smooth, metallic bones of air. Those that do not chase, are unwilling or unable to do so, stand sentinel, tracing instead the route once passed. Like fox prints in soot, they follow the often spaced and sometimes clustered shrines left by those before them, leaving their own breadcrumb trail of artefacts, guttering tea lights, sodden birthday cards. But unlike the fairy tale trail back to safety, it is hoped this dotted line will lead them onwards, through each of their own dark tunnels towards a daylight unseen since their loss. None of those who visit these new stations of the cross, who follow these wind-blown pilgrimages, speak to one another, though they can be heard whispering names as mantras, as prayers, names as affirmations. The inconsolable seem to be entirely unaware they are one of, by the end of the year, hundreds, gathering, walking, sprinting, standing, waiting, weeping across the city. As a child, my mum had a friend who grew to resemble the princess even more closely. They stayed friends through high school and enrolled at the same nursing college, their first jobs together. They stayed in touch, albeit sporadically, as each grew and started families of their own, both married with 2 children, both a boy and a girl, both the girl the eldest, the boy the youngest, both divorced, though only she remarried, to be widowed a few years later. I collected my mum from the funeral. She was already reckoning with her own terminal diagnosis by then, though for a year of treatment she was well, or at least well enough to attend funerals. Many of the photos we collected together after Mum's death to be displayed at a memorial service featured her childhood friend. Pictured sat close, gathered necessarily so by the narrow lens, almost in each other's laps, almost always in a garden, squinting into the sun. The flowers around them all either white or a kind of sickening magenta, the only colours reliably preserved, or else leaning against a car, one or the other's first, or that of a parent. The green gold paintwork and chrome, leant against, proudly displayed. The squints distorting their faces, turning smiles to sneers, or else a hand shading the eyes, eliminating them from the image. A black bar, as if redacted, anonymity preserved. Through the 60s and 70s, these 2 children grow and take on adult postures, adult clothes, uniforms. The time between images grows, the lurches in fashion and features more marked. Eventually there are no more images of them together. They stop somewhere in the early 80s, around the time they both marry. Both start families, children born within a year or so of each other, as if taking cues from one another. The few photos of my parents' wedding, probably the last we find of them together. The friend got in touch a few days after the memorial. She'd been there, but neither I nor my sister had much time to talk to her. Even then, and last I saw her, she had something of the princess in her. The slight underbite, the blue eyes, her hair, a living waxwork, uncanny yet off, capturing the essentials but missing something crucial. A waxwork that somehow aged, showed us the almost face of a princess who was otherwise fixed in time, a glimpse into a distorted almost future. She got in touch to thank us and with memories of Mum, and to ask us if she could live in Mum's house. By early spring, the first deaths are reported. Falls from rickety and shaky heights, overground trains and buses striking mourners as they crouch to lay another photograph or swimming badge. It is not always possible to link these deaths to the weekly hauntings, unless in their palm is found some indisputable shred of their loss. A scarf torn to rags, each one to be laid in turn where the skeleton had grazed the earth and skyline that week. Posies of untidy flowers crushed by 2 tight hands. It is even harder to mourn these lives, given as they were to sorrow, resistant to life, unwarmed by spring sun, blind to its healing. Carved out lives, scraped and full only of echoes. By sunrise they are gone, or else their fallen bodies left to cool, though really it is not so many that end their suffering this way. Devotions complete or deferred for another week, another night. The streets are cleared and the foxes return, either sated or still hungering, to their hidden and shaded dens beneath garages and sheds. In their earths, the smell of the streets is on them, in their fur, but is their smell also. The streets smell of the foxes as much as the foxes smell of the streets. An exchange, or perhaps a combining, a commingling of dry and pungent scents. There was no good reason for her not to move into our mum's house. It stood empty, serving only as a monument or else a no-man's land for my and my sister's grief, away from our respective family homes, somewhere to spend time in her presence, without intrusion. But as we emptied the house, leaving only the large furniture and kitchen basics, her presence became less noticeable. As if we were wiping clean, emptying her out along with the broken utensils and the accumulated paperwork, dusting her from the corners of each room and carrying pieces of her down through the loft hatch, filling her bins with her many parts and particles, painting over the stains and discoloured paintwork of her skin, replacing her broken tiles with anonymous and historyless ones, pristine. The house was empty, and the widowed friend of our mum had sold her home, was looking to move nearby. Neither my sister nor I could think of a single reason not to have this approximation of our mum squatting here in her once home. It was to be temporary and better than a stranger. She had visited mum at home when she was ill, the first time she had visited her house since she moved there almost 16 years previously. They had met in that same time, but always on neutral ground, away from their respective homes, as if the lives they had built away from each other held no relevance to their meeting. We would visit her and her family when we were kids, the forced play of children, strangers to each other except for their parents' shared history. Close enough in age that it should have worked, but instead estranged by our seeming similarities. I was to be named the same as her son, but she got there first by a few months, as if he beat me to my own name. Other friends didn't visit, couldn't bring themselves to sit across from their decaying friend. The smell of antiseptic and bile, medicinal clutter and mess. Home care staff mercifully interrupting stilted talk to fuss and to coddle. The carers were either hearty and buoyant as if trying to lift their charge on their own tide of no-nonsense cheer, or else businesslike and quiet, efficient to the point of resentment, a job to be done before the next, like any other. She lived there for a few months. We would visit occasionally, technically now her landlords, to sit on mum's sofa, in mum's house, talking to this person that was not our mum, felt like a refraction, as if the normal course of life had been sifted and split, the constituent strands loosed and left to fall where they may. Who was this intruder we had invited into our home that was not ours, this person we had met perhaps fewer than 20 times in our lives, now wearing our mum's house as a costume, opening her windows, her doors, and pretending at a life? It passed, she left, found a new place by the sea. We have never visited and haven't spoken much since. The house is now sold, no longer ours to linger amongst. The last pieces of mum gone from its rooms, or else painted over with enough layers that she won't show through. The sun set over an hour ago. The night thickens between the lampposts. The skyline is losing definition as the blinking red lights of overhead aircraft mark their passage through the blue-orange sky. It is midsummer. The weekly vigil has begun. Mourners clutch talismans to their sides, ready to form quick and hurried shrines. There are not many now who gather on the mall, observant of the unsteady and fuzzy ritual, but amongst them are those who have returned almost weekly for over a decade, a few even longer, since the beginning. They wait. There is a flicker below the sky, behind the ranks of high and shining buildings, a momentary interruption to the expanding night. They look to the sun-abandoned west, to the fading skyline as it dissolves. They look back to the palace. Some step into the street, to the centre of the road. Others remain still, as if stakes have been driven through their feet into the ground. The timings are never exact, but those that have stood here enough times know that it has normally appeared by now. An hour passes and still no one speaks, except for the usual low hum of chanted names, the invocation of the lost. The first howl can be heard just before midnight, short and animal. It is a sob, a yelp, and the lingering tale of a name. More follow as if a signal has been given. The first minutes of the new day begin to fill with disparate and brittle cries, guttural shouts with short, flat echoes, overlaid by the next shattered voice. No stars are visible, there is no moon. The only light comes from the lit streets and buildings surrounding the mall. Windows are shut against the sound of yelps and cries and long, drawn-out, wavering howls that fill the night. Heads appear, silhouettes in windows, before blinds and curtains are drawn, as if the glass and fabric can muffle and silence the shrieking night. Before the sky begins to dilute, the dark growing milky and weak, fraying at its eastern edge. the mall empties. Some take the makings of their abandoned shrines, others drop them at their feet. Ticket stubs and hairbands, unlit candles and coins roll on the tarmac, deposits left to the random forces of preservation and obliteration. The buildings gain resolution, extract their form from the loosening night. Some of the highest windows begin to reflect an early proto-dawn light. The street is almost empty. As the sun appears between buildings, igniting green fire amongst the trees of St. James's Park, the mall is empty except for one figure, their shadow only now growing from their feet, slantwise across the tarmac. In their right hand are photographs, a sheaf of small faded images with rounded edges, bordered in white. 2 women, almost girls, are visible in the topmost photograph. One wears navy shorts, 2 white stripes down the side. Her legs appear brilliant white in the faded and sun-scarred image. She is wearing a red and white striped vest. Her hair is short and fair, swept to the left. One hand extends behind to support her weight. Palm planted in the grass of a long thin lawn at the front of a terraced house, brown and black stone. The other hand is held to her brow to shield her eyes from the bright sun, which both girls look toward. Her eyes are not visible. The shadow cast by the hand is a black bar across the top half of her face. Her mouth is pulled into an open smile, invisible eyes presumably squinting to see whoever is pointing the camera. The girl beside her wears flared denim jeans and a knitted tank top over a white t-shirt. The sleeves are capped and bordered with thick black. The stripes of the tank top alternate between wavy and straight, brown and cream. Both her hands extend behind to the grass, and her eyes appear to be almost closed against the sun. Both sides of her smile lifted to reveal her teeth. Her head is tilted slightly and her blonde hair, also cut short, falls to brush the wool of the pullover at her shoulder. Her shoulders are rolled forward by the effort of supporting her seated weight, as if her torso is suspended, draped from her staked arms. Both pairs of legs dangle over what must be a retaining wall, built of the same buff and sooty stone as the house behind, the grass insinuating itself amongst the mortar along with what must have been small clinging flowers, though their colour is lost. Their feet are not visible, cut off from the image by the thick white border of the photograph. The picture seems half-posed, as if they have been called up from lounging, impromptu sunbathing, to have their photo taken, told to shuffle together and look at the camera. The girl in the foreground, the one in the navy shorts, is leaning in towards the girl in the tank top, adding to the sense of a hastily assembled arrangement. Their eyes, until recently closed, struggling to adjust to the harsh light the camera needs at the photographer's back. The lone, last remaining figure on the mall does not howl or bay at the dawn. He does not look at the photographs as his thumb worries at a dog-eared corner. Already there is the sound of the city beginning to shake and maul itself into the new day, the sound of the street sweepers and bin lorries, reversing signals and horns, loud engines in the distance. The lone figure walks south, across the street to the edge of the park, stepping over the low barrier and onto the grass. He walks between the trees, through grass sodden with dew. Small leaves, fallen and brown, stick to the wet of his shoes. He does not keep to any one path, following instead an invisible fall line, a line of least resistance, through the green and mottled park, streaked with tree shadow, until he is no longer visible from the tarmac. The sun, now clear of the buildings, casts a brilliant whiteness upon the city. Even above the gathering noise, the calls of birds, the tail end of their dawn chorus is loud and shrill, a crescendo of mingling and tickling songs and alarm. Warm and sparkling, ecstatic and panicked in the new day. Beneath the trees, beneath the sheds and lockups surrounding the park, behind the streets and buildings, in the shadow lanes of the city, parallel and miniature to the busy roads, vixens curl around suckling cubs and roll to their backs, offering up their milk and warmth to the nuzzling and grunting generations. The light of the new day does not reach them. They wait for the night to return, for their own pilgrimages, to the bins and waste heaps of the city, to the left behind turned forage for hungry and yapping offspring. So that's it. That's the story. I'm gonna pause here. I'm under a duvet and I am so hot that the sweat is dripping off the end of my nose, which is a little image for you. So bear with me a second. I'll be back. Okay, I'm back. I realise no time will have passed for you, but I had to get out of there. That was crazy. That was so hot. I've been messing around with ways of improving the sound quality, so hopefully it's worth it. We'll find out. Let me know if you think it's, or if you have any tips, I suppose. So that was the piece. I read it in full. It is quite long. Yeah, so playing around with some of that imagery. One of the challenges that I came across when I was initially writing about the funeral was how to not make it too sentimental, I guess, especially talking about two boys and like walking behind the carriage. And there's a lot of dialogue at the time around, they were forced to do it and it was such a cruel thing. And it is like a pretty hard thing to watch, but I don't know, I just find it hard to project onto them how we would feel about that because we're not them. And I suppose that's the point, isn't it? It's quite an individualistic thing, which is what I try and bring to the later on to the way people are leaving their offerings. It's kind of individual how we respond to these things. So hopefully that comes across. And then that ending of it just doesn't turn up and he just walks off or I just walk off. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of like an ambiguous ending, so I'm resistant to tying everything up with a neat bow, but I feel like I need to give the reader just like a little crumb of something, so I have the flickering below the skyline, the idea that there's a glitch in the matrix, which maybe works. I don't know. I feel like I need to just kind of maybe try a few different versions and play around with it, or else just sit with it and be comfortable with the idea that it's irresolute. I don't know. I'm not sure. Plus, there's no real ending for the lone figure, who I guess is me. But maybe that's the point I've written elsewhere, that grief, it doesn't fade, it changes pitch. It's like a Doppler effect. As a siren passes you, the pitch changes. And maybe that's it. Maybe it doesn't, this idea of I can solve my grief by touching this skeleton or laying these offerings or following a pilgrimage is false. It's a false notion because you can never get rid of it. It's just going to change over time. But then these people haven't had that change over time, maybe. I don't know. So it's definitely ambiguous. Whether that's a bad thing, I don't know. So I want to talk about some of the books that I've been reading, or a book that I read that I think informed this quite a lot. Obviously been reading a lot throughout the course, and I'll hopefully do a separate episode which goes through a load of the titles that I've been reading, but I'll maybe just pick one for now because it's already quite a long episode. Was Grief is a Thing with Feathers by Max Porter, which is only a short book. It's a couple hundred pages, and it was recommended to me by my dissertation supervisor when I was explaining what I was trying to write with this piece. He very correctly said it might be instructive, and it really was. It's about, and I think I'm right in saying it's autobiographical, or at least parts of it are. So the author is widowed, and he has two young children, two young boys, and it's an account of that. But what Porter does is he introduces grief as a character in the form of a giant crow that comes to live with them, and he gives the crow a voice, and it's this kind of weird clickety-clackety crow talk. It's kind of semi-English, semi-not onomatopoeic stuff, really weird and dark, and he comes and pecks around in their lives and talks to the father and talks to the children, and other sections are told from the children's perspective as a kind of collective narrative, and then the father's perspective, and eventually the crow leaves once father's got through this certain stage of grief. But it's very strangely written. It swaps from these different perspectives. It introduces grief as like a physical manifested character, and it's an anthropomorphic character, which is kind of interesting. I read it in one sitting, and I cried at multiple points throughout it. And it's my use of language. I try to be quite precise and quite measured and quite kind of almost clean in its usage, and it's a bit clinical. And this is the exact opposite. It's almost stream of consciousness, this, like I say, this almost onomatopoeic flow of crow language, and the children's like tumbles over each other and through each other, and it almost wants to come off the page and be spoken. And my use of language is not like that, and I think with some of my other pieces I'd love to come away from that more measured use of language and into a slightly more free form, which is I really enjoy reading, and when I do write in that style I do really enjoy it. So I'd like to do more of that, and I haven't done in this piece, and I maybe don't feel like it would suit it, but I hope I can bring it into some other pieces. Yeah, a really interesting approach to auto-fiction, experimental, and one of the things that's kind of reassuring is it was a pretty mainstream release. It wasn't some tiny little niche press, 300 copies or whatever. It did pretty well, and proved that these kind of experimental forms have a place within the market, actually. I mean, like, realistically, got to think about where I'm going with my writing, and hopefully people want to read it. So yeah, it was reassuring to know that people are willing to read kind of weird stuff that blends the real and the not real. And as a portrayal of grief, I thought it was really effective. And yeah, I recommend it. It's a James Gray recommend. Pebble Inspector approved. So I think that's enough for today's episode. I hope the reading wasn't too long for you. Next week, I'm going to talk about another piece of writing that I'm working on for my dissertation, the one of the three. This one of the pieces is an account of essentially mine and my sister's childhood, but also maybe just that generation of people, our generation of people. Well, it's called, the original working title was an A to Z of reasons we are the way we are. And it's told in an A to Z style, sort of entries into a sort of an encyclopedia. And through it, you get an idea of our childhood and the era of the 90s, and then why we as a generation are the way we are, but then also why we as individuals, brother and sister, are the way we are. And what's developed through it is this account of us being pretty feral as children, of physically fighting, and then we've grown to be adults who essentially are pretty friendly and we're pretty sensible, and we've grown up and have kids and stuff. How that has come about. The A to Z style, I was quite keen to do like a bit of a listing, so yeah, we'll see how that develops. And then other piece is an account of, again, back to childhood, but growing up on a farm high up on the moors, and it seemed to always be winter, and I don't remember it because I was too young. So there's this strange thing of having a history that you don't remember, and you only know of it through the stories that are told around you. There's also themes of trying to live a different way and how that fails and how you move on from that. And also, again, with the not having memories of something and how we rely on the stories of others, what stories we miss out on in our own biography. So we shared the farm with another family, and then we all moved away, and I don't know why, and how we can fill in those blanks and what space there is for making our own story. And there was a giant unkillable turkey who kind of becomes this godlike figure on the farm. So yeah, lots of animal death, lots of sparse moorland bleakness, rich pickings, I think, for imagery. And then, like I say, I'm going to try and do another episode of looking at some of the titles that I've read throughout the course of my masters. So I hope that was of interest. That's all for now. Godspeed, best of the luck in all your future endeavours. Thank you, and bye 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 bye.